At the age of 20, Alexander the Great stood at the crossroads of history, ready to carve his name into the annals of time. His ambition was as vast as the empire he was about to create, a world spanning from the cliffs of Macedon to the golden sands of India. Born into a royal lineage that was already shaped by conquest and power, Alexander was destined to follow in his father's footsteps, yet his drive to surpass his legacy would make him one of history's most extraordinary figures. His vision was clear: to conquer, to unite, and to leave a legacy that would outlive his time. Raised by a father who revolutionized the Macedonian military and tutored by the philosopher Aristotle, Alexander's education prepared him for greatness. Yet, it was his insatiable hunger for glory that drove him to cross into foreign lands and defy the odds at every turn. His journey, though brief, would span continents, dismantle empires, and forever alter the course of history. In the year 356 BCE, the city of Pella, the capital of ancient Macedon, witnessed the birth of a child destined for greatness. The son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias, Alexander was born into an extraordinary lineage. His father, Philip, had transformed Macedonia from a fractured kingdom into a powerful military state, and his mother, Olympias, was a woman of formidable intelligence and influence, with a strong claim to divine heritage. She believed that her son was no ordinary child, a sentiment she would cultivate throughout his life. The early years of Alexander's life were shaped by a unique combination of royal privilege and high expectations. His parents, recognizing his potential, ensured that he would have the finest education available. Yet, it was not just the material wealth of the Macedonian court that marked Alexander's early life, but also the powerful figures who surrounded him. His father, a seasoned warrior and strategist, imparted crucial lessons on leadership, diplomacy, and warfare. Olympias, with her fierce devotion to her son, cultivated in Alexander a belief in his own divine destiny. From an early age, Alexander was introduced to the world of philosophy, politics, and military tactics. His first teacher was Leonidas, a man who instilled in him the value of discipline, perseverance, and the art of war. However, it was his next tutor who would have an even greater impact on his life. At the age of 13, Alexander began his education under the tutelage of Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in Western history. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander learned not only about rhetoric, poetry, and philosophy, but also about the natural world, science, and geography. Aristotle's influence would stay with him throughout his life, shaping his worldviews and strategies. Aristotle's teachings were integral to Alexander's ability to understand and manage the complexities of his kingdom. More than just an education in theory, Aristotle prepared Alexander for the practical challenges he would face as a ruler. His teachings on ethics, governance, and the relationship between nature and humanity helped Alexander develop a sense of purpose and direction. Through his studies, Alexander developed a love for Homer's epics, particularly the Iliad, which became his constant companion during his military campaigns. In many ways, Alexander's view of himself as a hero was modeled after the mythic warriors of Homer's world. At the age of 16, Alexander's first taste of leadership came when his father, King Philip, led an expedition to the east. Left in charge of Macedon, Alexander was given full authority to govern in his father's absence. His first significant challenge came when a tribe of Thracians attempted to revolt against Macedonian rule. With his army, Alexander swiftly dealt with the uprising, winning the loyalty of the local population. His victory was so significant that he founded a city, Alexandropolis, in celebration, marking his first act of independent leadership. Yet, this was not the only time Alexander would prove himself. During his time as regent, Alexander took on another challenge that would solidify his position as a capable and fearless leader. He led a military campaign against the Greek city of Thebes, which had attempted to rebel against Macedonian control. Though he was still a teenager, Alexander led his forces with such skill and precision that Thebes was quickly crushed, and its people were forced into submission. This victory cemented Alexander's reputation as a rising star in the military and political world. Despite his youth, Alexander displayed a level of strategic thinking, bravery, and charisma that rivaled seasoned generals. His soldiers respected him not just because he was the king's son, but because he had earned their admiration through his actions on the battlefield. The young regent proved that he could lead men into battle, even against overwhelming odds, and come out victorious. In 336 BC, when Alexander was just 20 years old, a tragedy struck that would set the course for his destiny. King Philip II, Alexander's father, was assassinated by one of his bodyguards during a celebration in the capital. The sudden death of Philip left Alexander as the new king of Macedon. Though Alexander was still young, he immediately began to consolidate power, dealing with those who would threaten his rule. The first challenge came from within his own family. His mother, Queen Olympias, had long had a contentious relationship with Philip's new wife, Cleopatra, and her children. When Philip died, Olympias made sure that Cleopatra's family would not threaten her son's claim to the throne. Alexander moved swiftly, eliminating any potential rivals and ensuring his own power. However, Alexander's challenges were not only internal. Macedonia faced threats from both external and internal enemies, including the Greek city-states that had long been wary of Macedonian dominance. Alexander, aware that he needed to secure his position as king, immediately moved to quell dissent and establish his authority. In a remarkable move, he called upon his military prowess to subdue Greece and reaffirm his control over the region. The Greek states that had once resisted Philip's rule now had to contend with Alexander's fierce determination. The first act of Alexander's reign was a military campaign to ensure Macedon's dominance in Greece. As soon as he ascended to the throne, he moved quickly to quell a rebellion in the northern regions of Macedonia. The rebellious tribes were swiftly defeated, sending a message to the rest of Greece that Alexander was not to be underestimated. He also took steps to strengthen his alliances with the Greek city-states, reassuring them of his leadership while maintaining the firm hand his father had wielded. In 335 BC, Alexander moved to crush a rebellion in Thebes, a city that had long resisted Macedonian rule. He surrounded the city with his army and demanded their submission. The Thebans, who had once fought against his father, were unable to resist. The city was utterly destroyed, and its inhabitants were either killed or sold into slavery. The destruction of Thebes was a clear message to the rest of Greece. Alexander would not tolerate dissent. His victory over Thebes solidified his position and demonstrated his military genius. With his power firmly established in Macedonia and Greece, Alexander began to turn his attention to the greater challenges that lay beyond the borders of his kingdom. His father had begun a campaign against the Persian Empire, but Alexander was now in the position to complete what his father had started. The idea of conquering the Persian Empire, which had long been seen as the dominant force in the ancient world, became a personal ambition for Alexander. With his military experience, tactical brilliance, and the loyalty of his army, Alexander began to lay the groundwork for his campaign to the east. Alexander's motivation for conquest was multifaceted. On one hand, it was driven by his desire for glory. He wanted to surpass the achievements of his father and become a legendary figure whose name would be remembered for centuries. But on a deeper level, Alexander was also driven by a desire to spread Greek culture, ideas, and philosophy to the vast lands he would conquer. His education under Aristotle had instilled in him a deep belief in the superiority of Greek culture, and he saw his conquests as a way to share this culture with the world. Furthermore, Alexander was deeply influenced by the epics of Homer, particularly the Iliad, which he carried with him on his campaigns. In Homer's tales, Alexander saw himself as a hero destined for greatness, much like Achilles or Odysseus. He saw his life as one of divine providence, and his desire to conquer the known world was linked to his belief that he was chosen by the gods to do so. This sense of destiny, combined with his military ambition, would drive him across 3 continents and reshape the ancient world. In the early years of Alexander's reign, the Persian Empire was the dominant power in the ancient world. Spanning from Asia Minor to the Indus River, the Persians controlled an empire larger and more diverse than anything Alexander could have imagined. Yet, in the eyes of the young king, the Persian Empire was not just an obstacle, it was a challenge to his vision of greatness, an opportunity to forge an enduring legacy. The Persian Empire, led by King Darius III, was a massive and ancient kingdom built on centuries of conquest. Darius was a relatively weak ruler compared to the empire's former glory. His reign had been marked by political instability and military setbacks. The empire had grown complacent, and Alexander saw this as his moment to strike. It was clear that Darius would be Alexander's ultimate adversary, and the Persian king's army would stand between Alexander and the fulfillment of his ambition. But the question remained, could Alexander, a young king with limited experience in warfare, defeat one of the most powerful armies the world had ever seen? The answer would soon unfold on the fields of battle. In 334 BCE, with his army of about 35,000 soldiers, Alexander crossed the Hellespont and entered Asia Minor. This marked the beginning of his campaign against the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire, recognizing the threat, quickly mobilized a force of over 40,000 troops under the command of the Persian satraps of Asia Minor. Alexander's first major engagement with the Persian forces came at the Battle of Granicus, located near the modern-day Turkish city of Çanakkale. The battle was intense. Alexander's forces, despite being outnumbered, used their superior tactics and discipline to overcome the Persian forces. Alexander personally led his cavalry in the attack, displaying incredible bravery as he charged directly into the fray. The battle saw heavy casualties on both sides, but it ended with a decisive Macedonian victory. The Persian commanders, including several satraps, were either killed or captured. This victory was crucial for Alexander in establishing his reputation as a military genius. It not only secured his foothold in Asia Minor, but also demonstrated that the Persian Empire, once thought invincible, could be defeated by a smaller, more agile army. It was the first of many victories that would shape Alexander's rise as one of the greatest military commanders in history. The next major challenge came with the city of Tyre, a Phoenician stronghold located on an island just off the coast of modern-day Lebanon. Tyre was a powerful city-state that had long been a thorn in the side of the Persian Empire, and now it stood as a formidable obstacle in Alexander's path. The city was well fortified, with a long history of military prowess, and its location on the island made it virtually impregnable. But Alexander, known for his tactical ingenuity, was not one to back down from a challenge. In order to lay siege to Tyre, Alexander ordered his forces to build a causeway, an artificial land bridge, stretching from the mainland to the island. For months, his soldiers worked tirelessly to construct this causeway, despite constant resistance from the Tyrians. The construction was a masterpiece of military engineering, allowing Alexander's forces to move closer to the city's walls. Once the causeway was complete, Alexander launched a series of attacks on Tyre's defenses. The city's walls, however, proved resistant to conventional siege techniques. In response, Alexander employed the use of siege towers and battering rams, breaking down the fortifications and gaining access to the city. The Tyrians fought valiantly, but in the end, the Macedonian forces breached the walls, and Tyre fell. The Siege of Tyre is often cited as one of Alexander's greatest military achievements. The sheer determination and resourcefulness displayed by his army were unmatched, and the victory was a clear message to any city-state or ruler who dared to challenge his authority. The destruction of Tyre left the Persian Empire vulnerable, as one of its most important naval bases had now fallen into Alexander's hands. In 333 BCE, after his success in Asia Minor and the fall of Tyre, Alexander turned his attention to the heart of the Persian Empire. Darius III, in an attempt to stop the Macedonian advance, met Alexander in battle at Issus, near the modern-day Turkish-Syrian border. The Persian army, vastly larger than Alexander's, numbered over 100,000 men, and it was supported by war chariots, cavalry, and infantry. Despite being outnumbered nearly 3-1, Alexander's tactics once again proved superior. He used the narrow terrain of Issus to his advantage, positioning his army in a way that minimized the effect of the Persian cavalry. The battle began with a fierce clash between the two armies, But the turning point came when Alexander led a direct charge against the heart of the Persian line, targeting Darius himself. In the chaos of battle, Darius panicked and fled, abandoning his troops. The Macedonian victory at Issus was decisive. Darius's army was scattered, and Alexander gained control of much of Asia Minor. The victory sent shockwaves through the Persian Empire, as Darius's inability to protect his forces and himself undermined his authority. With Darius in retreat, Alexander pursued his adversary, pressing forward into the heart of Persia. The final confrontation between Alexander and Darius took place at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. This was the battle that would determine the fate of the Persian Empire. Darius, now desperate to preserve his throne, assembled an army of over 250,000 men, which included cavalry, chariots, and war elephants. Alexander, on the other hand, commanded an army of around 47,000 soldiers, small in comparison, but highly disciplined and battle-hardened. The battle began with a tense standoff, but Alexander's strategic brilliance soon became apparent. He identified a weak point in the Persian line and, with characteristic boldness, led his cavalry to exploit it. His forces cut through the Persian lines, creating chaos within Darius's ranks. At the same time, the Persian cavalry, which had been positioned on the flanks, struggled to make an impact against Alexander's forces. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Darius ordered his chariots and war elephants to charge. However, Alexander's army was prepared for this move, using their superior tactics to neutralize the Persian charges. As the battle wore on, Darius realized the battle was lost, and he fled the field, leaving his army to be crushed by Alexander's forces. The defeat at Gaugamela marked the final collapse of the Persian Empire. The way was now open for Alexander to seize control of Babylon, Persepolis, and the entire Persian heartland. After the battle, Alexander marched triumphantly into the ancient city of Babylon. The city opened its gates to the conqueror, and Alexander was hailed as a liberator. From Babylon, he moved on to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. Here, Alexander's army looted and destroyed the city, setting fire to the magnificent palace of Persepolis, a symbolic act of revenge against the Persian Empire for its past conquests. The fall of Persepolis marked the end of the Persian Empire's dominance. Alexander's conquest of Persia had been swift and brutal, and the vast lands that once belonged to the Persians now lay under his control. Yet, Alexander's ambition did not stop here. He set his sights on even greater challenges, pushing forward into the heart of Asia and beyond. Alexander's conquest of Persia was not just a military achievement, it was a cultural and political revolution. His reign brought Greek ideas and institutions to the lands he conquered. The spread of Hellenistic culture, including Greek language, philosophy, art, and architecture, became a hallmark of Alexander's empire. His efforts to blend Eastern and Western cultures through marriage alliances and political policies helped create a new world order that would influence the development of civilizations for centuries to come. Despite the fragility of the empire that Alexander created, one that would splinter into warring factions after his death, his legacy lived on in the vast cultural exchange that his campaigns facilitated. The Persian Empire, once a dominant force in the ancient world, was no more, but the world that Alexander left behind was forever changed. In 326 BC, Alexander the Great, having already conquered most of the known world, set his sights on the vast and mysterious lands of India. His conquests in Persia had been nothing short of spectacular, but now he was about to face a new and unfamiliar challenge. The vast subcontinent, with its powerful kingdoms and unknown terrains, was a land that had resisted foreign invaders for centuries. However, to Alexander, this was yet another challenge to overcome. He believed that nothing could stop him from achieving his goal of world domination. With a force of approximately 120,000 men, including infantry, cavalry, and support staff, Alexander crossed the Indus River and entered the Punjab region. This marked the beginning of the Indian campaign, and Alexander was now in uncharted territory. His men, battle-hardened from years of conflict across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, were eager to follow their king into the unknown. But even the most seasoned soldiers would soon realize that the challenges they would face in India were unlike anything they had encountered before. The first major battle of the Indian campaign occurred at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, fought in 326 BCE against King Porus, the ruler of the ancient kingdom of Parava. Porus, a formidable opponent, had assembled a large army of around 30,000 soldiers, including infantry, cavalry, and war elephants. The use of war elephants in battle was a unique and terrifying tactic that Alexander had never faced before. The battlefield, located near the modern-day city of Jhelum in Pakistan, was strategically significant. The Hydaspes River, which flowed through the region, presented a natural obstacle for both armies. Alexander, however, was determined to turn this disadvantage into an opportunity. Knowing that Porus would not expect an immediate attack across the river, Alexander executed a brilliant tactical maneuver. In the dead of night, he led his army on a treacherous march to a point where the river could be crossed unnoticed. By morning, his forces had crossed the river and set up camp on the other side, catching King Porus by surprise. The battle that followed was one of the most intense and hard-fought encounters of Alexander's career. Porus's war elephants, towering over the battlefield, initially seemed to give his forces the upper hand. However, Alexander's strategy was once again key to his success. He focused his attacks on the flanks of Porus's army, using his cavalry to exploit gaps in the Persian lines. Alexander himself led the charge, demonstrating his fearless leadership and personal bravery. He also targeted the elephants, using archers and javelin throwers to create chaos within Porus's ranks. As the battle raged on, the tide turned in Alexander's favor. Despite the superior numbers and strength of the elephants, Porus's forces were eventually overwhelmed. The death of many of Porus's soldiers and the capture of his elephants marked the end of the battle. King Porus, however, was not captured or killed. When brought before Alexander, he famously asked the conqueror to treat him like a king. Alexander, impressed by Porus's dignity and bravery, spared his life and allowed him to retain control over his kingdom, a decision that would later be seen as a testament to Alexander's magnanimity. The victory at the Battle of the Hydaspes was a turning point in Alexander's Indian campaign. It demonstrated his ability to adapt to new forms of warfare and his tactical brilliance in the face of unfamiliar challenges. Yet it was also a costly victory. The battle had taken a toll on both sides, and many of Alexander's men were beginning to grow weary of the continuous campaigns and the harsh conditions of the Indian subcontinent. After his victory over Porus, Alexander continued to march eastward into India, hoping to expand his empire further. However, his progress was slowed by the harsh terrain and the unfamiliar challenges presented by the region. The dense jungles, unpredictable weather, and unfamiliar flora and fauna proved to be more than just obstacles to Alexander's forces. They were constant reminders that this land was unlike anything they had encountered before. Moreover, the unfamiliar customs and practices of the Indian kingdoms added to the growing sense of alienation among Alexander's troops. The soldiers, many of whom had fought in Europe and Asia for over a decade, found it difficult to adapt to the cultural differences in the Indian subcontinent. Alexander, despite his education under Aristotle and his admiration for Persian culture, was now confronted with an entirely new set of challenges. The complex nature of Indian warfare, the use of elephants, and the highly disciplined armies of local rulers forced Alexander to rethink many of his military strategies. Yet, it was not just the external challenges that posed a threat to Alexander's campaign. It was also the growing discontent among his own soldiers. After years of continuous campaigning, with little rest and no prospect of returning home, the morale of the Macedonian army began to falter. The men were tired, and many longed for a return to the familiar landscapes of Macedonia. The final straw came when Alexander's army reached the Bios River, which marked the boundary of the known world for his soldiers. At the Bios River, Alexander faced a crisis unlike any he had encountered before. His army, exhausted from years of continuous warfare and demoralized by the unfamiliar terrain and customs of India, refused to march any further. The soldiers, many of whom had been with Alexander since the beginning of his campaign, had reached their breaking point. They had marched across Asia, defeated the mighty Persian Empire, and conquered much of the known world. Now, they faced an enemy they could not understand, and the allure of home proved too powerful to resist. In a dramatic confrontation, Alexander's soldiers mutinied. Led by their generals and senior officers, they refused to march further into India. They demanded that Alexander turn back and return to Macedonia. This was a moment of crisis for Alexander, who had long prided himself on his ability to lead his men through even the most difficult circumstances. His dreams of conquering India, and perhaps even the entire East, were now shattered by the revolt of his own troops. Alexander, ever the master of diplomacy, attempted to calm the mutiny. He appealed to his soldiers, reminding them of their great achievements and the glory they had earned. However, it became clear that his men were no longer willing to continue. Reluctantly, Alexander ordered a retreat, acknowledging that the will of his army was stronger than his own ambition. The decision to turn back was a bitter one for Alexander, but it marked the end of his campaign in India. After the mutiny at the Beas River, Alexander began the long journey back to Babylon. His army, though victorious in battle, was weary and demoralized, and many soldiers were now sick from the harsh conditions of the Indian subcontinent. Alexander's retreat was marked by a series of hardships, including difficult marches through hostile territories and the loss of key support from local allies. Despite these challenges, Alexander continued to lead his troops with determination, hoping to bring them back to the safety and familiarity of Mesopotamia. As they journeyed westward, Alexander's army passed through the regions of Afghanistan and Persia, where they encountered more resistance. However, Alexander's leadership and the loyalty of his generals ensured that the army continued to march forward, despite the hardships they faced. By 324 BCE, Alexander and his army arrived in the city of Babylon, a city that had become the heart of his empire. It was here that Alexander would take his final steps as a conqueror. Despite his many triumphs and his vision of world domination, Alexander's health began to deteriorate rapidly. By 324 BCE, Alexander the Great and his army had returned to Babylon, the magnificent city that he had previously conquered and dreamed of transforming into the heart of his sprawling empire. The journey back from India had been difficult, but Alexander's arrival in Babylon marked a moment of peace, at least for a short time. The city had been under his control for several years, and it was to be his administrative and cultural center. He had grand plans for its reconstruction and transformation into a metropolis worthy of his empire's ambition. Babylon, with its strategic position on the banks of the Euphrates River, was a natural choice for Alexander's vision. He had already begun to lay the groundwork for the city's expansion, commissioning grand buildings and architectural projects that would rival even the greatest cities of the ancient world. His long-term goal was to make Babylon the capital of his vast empire, where Greek culture would merge with the civilizations of the East in a new, hybrid world. However, this ambitious vision for Babylon would remain unfulfilled, as Alexander's time in the city would be tragically short-lived. The hardships of war, combined with the physical toll of years of campaigning, had begun to take a serious toll on Alexander's health. His soldiers, too, were weary from the constant military campaigns and the heavy losses they had sustained over the years. Yet, the city of Babylon was supposed to represent the pinnacle of Alexander's career, a place where his vision for a united empire, blending East and West, could thrive. But fate had other plans. In the early months of 323 BCE, Alexander, who had already suffered a series of physical ailments during his campaigns, fell ill with a fever. Initially, the illness seemed mild, perhaps nothing more than an ordinary fever common after the rigors of long marches and constant battle. But the symptoms worsened, and within a few days, Alexander was bedridden, unable to perform his usual duties. At first, his doctors believed it was a result of exhaustion and the hardships of war. However, as the fever persisted, there was increasing concern. Alexander's condition rapidly deteriorated, and his symptoms began to take on a more ominous quality. His body was racked with pain, and he became weak and delirious. The fever would not break, and within a few days, Alexander was unable to rise from his bed. His generals and soldiers, who had followed him through countless battles, now anxiously watched their king suffer. The great conqueror, who had defeated armies and empires, was now helpless in the face of an unknown illness. There were many theories about the cause of Alexander's illness. Some believed that it was a natural fever, a complication from the strain of years of campaigning, while others speculated that Alexander had been poisoned. The idea of poisoning was fueled by the mysterious and sudden nature of his illness. Some claimed that his political enemies had plotted against him, using poison to end his reign prematurely. However, no solid evidence was ever found to support this theory. Others suggested that the relentless stress of his campaigns, coupled with the various wounds he had sustained in battle, had weakened his body over time. It's also possible that Alexander's intense lifestyle, marked by excessive drinking, poor diet, and constant physical exertion, had contributed to his eventual breakdown. As the days passed, Alexander's condition worsened. His generals and close companions were powerless to help him. His body, once strong and invincible, seemed to be betraying him. For a man who had conquered most of the known world, the prospect of death must have been terrifying. During his illness, Alexander remained largely unconscious and disoriented, slipping in and out of feverish delirium. He was unable to speak coherently or make decisions, and many began to fear that their great leader was slipping away from them. The doctors who attended to Alexander were unable to explain his condition, and despite their best efforts, his fever refused to subside. In his final days, Alexander reportedly became unable to recognize those closest to him. His army, which had followed him across continents and through battles, now faced the unthinkable, losing the man who had led them to glory. During the days of his illness, Alexander's closest companions, including his generals, waited anxiously by his bedside. They had fought with him for years and had become his trusted confidants. Yet, in his final moments, they were powerless to prevent the inevitable. Even as Alexander's health continued to decline, there was a quiet hope that he would recover, that he would rise from his sickbed and continue his conquest. But the fever showed no signs of abating. In one of the more poignant moments of his final days, Alexander reportedly asked his generals who would succeed him. It is said that his response was cryptic, and no one was certain if he meant to choose his successor or if he was merely delirious from his fever. Nonetheless, it was clear that Alexander's illness had caused concern about the future of the empire. The question of who would lead in his absence was a troubling one, as Alexander had no clear heir and no plans for succession. On June 10th, 323 BCE, Alexander the Great died at the age of 32. His death marked the end of an era, the era of Greek conquest, and the beginning of the Hellenistic period. Alexander's passing was a moment of profound loss not just for his army, but for the entire world. His death sent shockwaves through his empire and beyond, and the world mourned the loss of a man who had, in a few short years, changed the course of history. The precise cause of his death has never been definitively determined, and there remain theories that persist to this day. Some suggest that he succumbed to a natural illness, such as malaria or typhoid fever, which were prevalent in ancient Babylon. Others maintain that he was poisoned, possibly by his own generals or political rivals, though this theory has never been proven. Some even speculate that Alexander's death was a result of his extreme lifestyle, his heavy drinking, frequent battles, and lack of rest, compounded by the emotional and physical toll of his unrelenting campaigns. Regardless of the cause, the loss of Alexander was profound, and the empire he had built was left vulnerable in the wake of his passing. His death left a power vacuum, and the question of succession loomed large over his empire. With Alexander's sudden death, the empire he had created, a vast and diverse realm that stretched from Greece to India, was thrown into turmoil. He had no clear successor, and his generals, who had been fiercely loyal to him, now found themselves competing for power. The fragmentation of Alexander's empire began almost immediately after his death, as his empire lacked the strong administrative structures and clear lines of succession that could have ensured its survival. After his death, Alexander's body was embalmed and placed in a magnificent golden sarcophagus. His tomb, located in Alexandria, Egypt, would become one of the most famous burial sites in the ancient world, attracting pilgrims and visitors from across the Mediterranean. Despite the grandeur of his tomb, Alexander's legacy would not be defined by his physical resting place. Instead, his empire began to fragment into several smaller kingdoms, each controlled by one of his generals, known as the Diadochi. The Diadochi, or successors, struggled to maintain control over the vast empire Alexander had built. They fought among themselves for power, and the empire was divided into several Hellenistic kingdoms, including the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, the Seleucid Empire, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. These kingdoms would continue to spread Greek culture and ideas across the known world, but they would never be united under a single ruler again. The vision of a united empire, blending east and west, and ruled by a single, powerful king, faded away after Alexander's death. His legacy was carried on by his successors, who, despite their rivalries and conflicts, ensured that the cultural and intellectual exchange initiated by Alexander continued. The Hellenistic period, which followed Alexander's death, saw the continued spread of Greek culture, philosophy, and art throughout the Mediterranean and into Asia. However, Alexander's death left a deep void in the hearts of his soldiers and the people of his empire. The man who had led them to the ends of the earth was gone, and they were left to grapple with the uncertainty of what would come next. The empire he built would never be as powerful or as unified as it had been under his leadership, but his influence would remain, and his name would endure as a symbol of greatness, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of glory. Although Alexander the Great's life was brief, his conquests left an indelible mark on history. By the time of his death in 323 BCE, he had amassed an empire that stretched from Greece to the borders of India, one of the largest and most culturally diverse empires in history. In just over a decade of relentless campaigning, he transformed the political landscape of the ancient world. His military genius, strategic foresight, and larger-than-life persona made him not just a conqueror, but an icon of ambition and power. Yet, perhaps more profound than the empire itself was the cultural transformation he ignited, a fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions that would shape the future of the Mediterranean and Asia for centuries. Alexander's influence stretched far beyond the political and military realms. The very fabric of the world he left behind was altered by his encounters with ancient cultures. While his empire fragmented after his death, the seeds of Hellenistic civilization had already been sown. The blending of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian cultures during his reign would give rise to new cities, new systems of thought, and new artistic expressions. This fusion of cultures became the hallmark of the Hellenistic period, the age that followed Alexander's passing, and one that would redefine the ancient world. One of Alexander's most enduring legacies is the spread of Greek culture, or Hellenism, across the vast regions he conquered. Unlike previous conquerors, Alexander did not impose his own culture on the lands he conquered. Instead, he sought to blend Greek ideals with the traditions and customs of the peoples he encountered, creating a hybrid culture that was distinctly Hellenistic. In the cities he founded, particularly Alexandria in Egypt, Greek influence flourished. Alexandria became a hub of learning and culture, where Greek ideas and Eastern traditions merged. The Library of Alexandria, one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world, attracted scholars, philosophers, and scientists from all corners of the Mediterranean and beyond. It was in Alexandria that great minds such as Euclid, Archimedes, and Galen advanced knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, laying the foundations for future scientific discoveries. Moreover, Alexander's policy of encouraging intermarriage between Greeks and local populations led to the creation of a new class of people who were both Greek and Persian, Greek and Egyptian, and so on. This blend of cultures created a cosmopolitan society that was different from the isolated city-states of Greece, reflecting the diversity and interconnectedness of Alexander's empire. This cultural diffusion would continue long after Alexander's death and shape the world for generations. After Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals, the Diadochi, who carved out their own kingdoms from the vast territories he had conquered. The three most notable Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from Alexander's empire were the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in the Near East, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. These kingdoms, while often in conflict with each other, shared a common Greek heritage and continued the fusion of Greek and local cultures that Alexander had started. The Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt became one of the most powerful and prosperous Hellenistic states. Under the rule of Ptolemy I, a former general of Alexander, the kingdom flourished. Alexandria, as the capital, became the intellectual and cultural center of the Hellenistic world. The Ptolemies were keen on maintaining Greek traditions and promoting Greek culture in Egypt, but they also adapted to Egyptian customs, incorporating them into their rule. This fusion of Greek and Egyptian traditions made the Ptolemaic dynasty one of the most unique and enduring of the Hellenistic kingdoms. The Seleucid Empire, which stretched from Syria to Persia, was the largest of the Hellenistic kingdoms. The Seleucids inherited a vast, culturally diverse territory and faced constant challenges in maintaining control over their empire. Despite these challenges, the Seleucid Empire became a center of Greek culture in the East, and cities such as Antioch flourished as cultural hubs. However, the Seleucid Empire was eventually weakened by internal strife and external pressures, including the rise of the Parthian Empire. The Antigonid dynasty controlled Macedonia, the homeland of Alexander. Although the Antigonids struggled to maintain their empire in the face of competition from other Hellenistic kingdoms, they continued to foster Greek culture and influence in the region. The Antigonid kings sought to preserve the legacy of Alexander, and under their rule, Macedonia remained an important player in the Hellenistic world. Despite their frequent conflicts, the Hellenistic kingdoms shared a common Greek identity. Greek language, art, philosophy, and religion were spread throughout the ancient world, influencing everything from politics to daily life. This cultural diffusion was perhaps the most significant legacy of Alexander's conquests, and it laid the foundation for the eventual rise of the Roman Empire, which would inherit much of the Hellenistic world. Another profound aspect of Alexander's legacy was the evolution of art and philosophy during the Hellenistic period. Alexander's conquests opened the door for new forms of artistic expression that blended Greek ideals with those of the conquered peoples. In sculpture, for example, Greek artists began to experiment with more emotional and realistic depictions of the human form, a shift from the idealized figures of earlier Greek art. Hellenistic art was characterized by its emphasis on realism and emotional expression. Sculptors like Lysippus, who served as Alexander's personal artist, captured the physical and emotional intensity of their subjects, reflecting the tumultuous nature of the era. Portraiture became more common during the Hellenistic period, as rulers sought to immortalize their likenesses for posterity. This new approach to art emphasized the individual and the human experience, marking a departure from the more abstract and idealized forms of earlier Greek art. In philosophy, the Hellenistic period saw the rise of several schools of thought that would influence Western thought for centuries to come. The Stoics, founded by Zeno of Citium, emphasized the importance of virtue and wisdom in achieving a harmonious life, focusing on self-control and rationality. The Epicureans, led by Epicurus, sought happiness through the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, advocating for a simple and tranquil life. The Cynics, led by Diogenes, rejected societal norms and materialism, promoting self-sufficiency and a life lived in accordance with nature. These schools of thought reflected the changing values of the Hellenistic world, where the focus shifted from the collective identity of the Greek polis to the individual's quest for meaning and happiness. The ideas of these philosophers would influence later thinkers, including the Romans and early Christian theologians. The Hellenistic period also saw significant advancements in science and mathematics, much of which was influenced by the cross-cultural exchange initiated by Alexander's conquests. Greek thinkers, exposed to the knowledge of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and India, were able to integrate ideas from different cultures and build upon them to make new discoveries. In mathematics, figures such as Euclid, known for his work Elements, laid the foundations for geometry. Euclid's systematic approach to the subject influenced mathematicians for centuries and became the standard textbook for teaching geometry well into the 19th century. Archimedes, one of the greatest mathematicians and engineers of the ancient world, made breakthroughs in understanding the principles of leverage, buoyancy, and the nature of fluids. His inventions, such as the Archimedean screw, were used for centuries in agriculture and water management. In astronomy, Hipparchus developed a model of the solar system that predicted the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable accuracy. His work laid the groundwork for later astronomers like Ptolemy, whose geocentric model of the universe would dominate Western thought for over 1,000 years. The intellectual environment of the Hellenistic period, with its exchange of ideas across cultures, fostered a remarkable period of scientific and philosophical progress. Alexander's conquests had opened the world to new ideas, and the resulting fusion of knowledge from East and West would shape the development of science for centuries to come. Despite the flourishing of culture, philosophy, and science during the Hellenistic period, the world Alexander created was not to last. The Hellenistic kingdoms were fragmented by internal strife and external pressures. The Seleucid Empire, weakened by dynastic struggles and invasions from the Parthians, gradually lost territory. The Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, despite its early successes, was weakened by economic instability and foreign invasions. The Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia was similarly weakened by conflict with other Hellenistic states and eventually absorbed into the expanding Roman Empire. While the Hellenistic period saw tremendous cultural and intellectual achievements, the lack of strong political unity and the constant power struggles among the Diadochi led to the decline of the Hellenistic world. The rise of Rome, with its military power and imperial ambitions, would eventually absorb the Hellenistic kingdoms and end the era of Greek-dominated empires. The legacy of Alexander the Great endures in the historical memory of the world. His conquests shaped the course of history, spreading Greek culture across the known world and paving the way for the eventual rise of Rome. His vision of a united empire, blending East and West, influenced future leaders and philosophers for centuries. Alexander's name became synonymous with greatness, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of glory. Even after the fragmentation of his empire, the influence of his campaigns would continue to be felt across the ancient world. In the centuries following his death, Alexander was revered as a godlike figure. His tomb in Alexandria became a place of pilgrimage, and his image appeared on coins, sculptures, and works of art across the Mediterranean. The cultural and intellectual achievements of the Hellenistic period continued to shape Western thought, even as the political world he had built fell apart. Alexander the Great, though dead, lived on in the legacy he left behind, a legacy that would influence civilizations for generations to come. The life of Alexander the Great, though brief, left an indelible mark on the world. His conquest of vast territories, from Greece to India, shattered the political landscapes of multiple civilizations, blending cultures and ideas in ways that had never been seen before. Alexander's ability to unite diverse peoples under a single banner was extraordinary, and his ambition to merge Eastern and Western cultures created a legacy that transcended time and geography. While Alexander's empire was short-lived, fragmenting almost immediately after his death, the cultural and intellectual impact of his conquests lived on long after the political unity he created disappeared. The Hellenistic period that followed his death became an era of profound cultural exchange, blending Greek philosophy, art, and science with the traditions of Egypt, Persia, and India. His vision of a world united through cultural fusion shaped the course of history, leaving an enduring imprint on the civilizations that followed. Rome, the dominant power that emerged after the fall of the Hellenistic kingdoms, inherited much from the world that Alexander had created. The Romans adopted Greek culture, philosophy, and art, incorporating them into their own political system and way of life. Through this cultural inheritance, Alexander's legacy lived on, not just in the cities and empires he conquered, but in the hearts and minds of those who sought to build upon the foundations he had laid. The blending of Greek and Eastern cultures under Alexander's reign laid the groundwork for many of the intellectual, artistic, and scientific advances of the subsequent centuries. His military strategies and political vision influenced countless leaders, and his quest for greatness continues to inspire individuals and nations to push the boundaries of what is possible. In the end, Alexander the Great was not merely a conqueror. He was a creator of worlds, a man whose ambition shaped the course of history and whose legacy is still felt today. His name has become synonymous with greatness, and his vision of a unified world, though never fully realized, remains one of the most enduring and captivating dreams in human history. The story of Alexander the Great is not just the story of a man, but of an age, a time when the world seemed boundless, when empires rose and fell, and when one man's dream brought together peoples from all corners of the earth, leaving a lasting imprint on the course of civilization. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. What do you think about Alexander the Great? Did I miss anything? Let me know. Also, don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video.